All right, we have some new data showing large gaps in who is participating in our elections. And the gaps, by the way, they're getting bigger. So the Brennan Center for Justice found turnout growing higher amongst white voters compared to non-white voters. Take a look at this graph. Each line showing the gap between white voters and other groups actually widening. It's due in part to the 2013 Supreme Court decision that overturned key parts of the Voting Rights Act, including Section 5, which required districts with a history of racial discrimination to have federal courts approve any changes to their voting policies. Want to bring in Kareem Creighton, Senior Director of Voting Rights and Representation at the Brennan Center, I should say, for Justice. Kareem, thanks for joining us on this. Appreciate it. So you have found in your studies that there is a direct correlation between the Supreme Court's decision back in 2013 and the voting rights gap or the voting gap that we are seeing between black and white communities. Talk more about that.
Sure, and thank you for having me, Yasmin. Our research team, led by Kevin Morris and Corinne Range, put together in a painstaking fashion 1 billion voting records, which really gives us the best picture of voting behavior in this country. And to your question about the effect of Shelby County, we were able to see a gap that has been persistent over the country and to some degree is grow at an accelerated pace after 2013 in the very places where Shelby County used to, or in fact did, essentially take away the preclearance provision of the Voting Rights Act. And under that act, as many of you all know, the federal government would have to pre-clear or approve potential changes in voting in the jurisdiction to make sure that they don't worsen political opportunity for people of color. And what you see with this data is after 2013, is essentially an accelerated growth rate in these counties compared to similarly situated counties that weren't pre-cleared. So as to the bet that Chief Justice Roberts made that the protections that pre-clearance offered really wouldn't make a difference because a lot of these differences were a thing of the past and that decision-making by legislatures wouldn't really affect voters, particularly voters of color, that turned out to be horribly wrong. And the burden of that was borne by people of color. So
it's interesting because that you talk about that. The decision was made in 2013, and obviously I'm going to paraphrase the heck out of this, but essentially they said, listen, we don't need this anymore, as you just said, because, you know, voter turnout is higher amongst black voters. And that was because of 2008 and 2012, right? They're essentially saying we've come a long way when it comes to racism in this country. We don't really need things like this. But that was because a black man was running for president of the United States, President Barack Obama. And since then, that has now kind of fallen off a cliff once again because of that decision in 2013. Is this also affecting the ability for black people, for black Americans to vote, to run, I should say, for office?
Well, I'd say first that, yes, Chief Justice Roberts looked at one particular year, 2012, and said, yeah, we see some differences that suggest this gap wasn't big enough or that the differences weren't so significant as to have a provision like Section 5. But what we show here is a broadened picture that shows that was the exception more than the rule. And the rule has been, in fact, that there is a gap. And now that the gap is growing, we see, frankly, some of the sad results of Section 5 not being in place. And to your point, it has had huge impact on the people who have needed this protection the most, and that is people of color, in particular black people in the South, the formerly covered jurisdictions of preclearance. Here's the thing that I think gives the best example of what has been lost. In Alabama, I'm sitting in Montgomery, my hometown. When we went through 2020's redistricting, it was possible to have drawn a second majority black district where at least black people would have an opportunity to elect a candidate of choice. The state legislature fought that tooth and nail and put what they wanted in place that essentially preserved the power that they had in the last decade, even though the law, we all told them, was pointing in the other direction. If preclearance were in place, that law would have never seen the light of day. And unfortunately, because it wasn't in place, there was a fight over 2 years, and frankly, people getting elected to office that essentially required them to go to court, spend the time and spend the money to get a favorable ruling. So we're only now in 2024 correcting a problem that existed in 2021. But of course, it goes beyond that to any number of practices and policies in counties that really go to basic access that people have to cast a ballot. All of these things have a cumulative effect on increasing the gap between Black voters and frankly non-white voters and white voters alike.
Kareem Creighton, thank you. Appreciate it.